In 2019, Australia suffered their worst fire season on record, devastating the entire continent. According to the Center for Disaster Philanthropy, over 46 million acres of land, 3,400 homes, and thousands of other buildings were destroyed. 34 lives were lost, and many more people were injured. On top of all of this, Chris Dickman, an ecologist at the University of Sydney, estimated over 1 billion animals died. This includes 800,000 whales. All of that in such a short period of time. The fires in Australia were a tragedy, but could they have been prevented? The short answer is yes. A new study published March 4th by climate scientist Gert von John Oldenburg explains that climate change caused Australia's fires to be at least 30% more likely to occur. NASA explained that carbon emissions were largely to blame. They create a greenhouse effect around the planet. This makes it harder for heat to leave the atmosphere, and over a long period of time warms the planet. This is climate change. Though Australia is a long ways away, the United States still suffers from thousands of fires annually and other effects of climate change. This is why, in order to create an incentive to reduce carbon emissions and, in turn, lower the effects of climate change, the United States should enable the adoption of a tax on carbon. To begin with, let's understand the true impact of carbon emissions in the United States. According to the U.S. Fire Administration, since 2009, more than 1,300 fires have been reported annually, 3,200 deaths, and almost $16 billion spent annually on relief from fires because of insurance payments, property loss, or health care. EPA.gov delves deeper into carbon dioxide specifically. 6,677 million metric tons of carbon have been emitted into the atmosphere annually. To give a visual representation, 1 metric ton of carbon looks like a 27 by 27 by 27 foot cube. That times almost 7,000 million is a lot of carbon emission into the atmosphere. In 2018, carbon emissions made up 81% of all emissions in the United States. This was a 3.1% increase from the previous year. Dr. Wines, a biologist, pleads, "The science community is urging the world to take action now." Now that we have a little bit better of an understanding about the impact of climate change and how carbon emissions play a role, let's discuss what a carbon tax would look like. But first, what is a carbon tax? It's a consumption and production-based tax. Let's say for a second that you just filled up your car with a tank of gas. Burning that gas emits carbon into the atmosphere. This affects not only you and the producer, but also literally everyone else. This is what we call a negative externality, or an additional cost borne by individuals not directly involved in the transaction. The carbon tax would have these external costs built right into it. But a carbon tax is not only a consumption based, it's also production based. We would tax on each metric ton of carbon emission a company or a factory produces annually. EPA.gov explains that this would create an economic incentive for businesses to become more eco-friendly. CarbonTax.org looks at the effects the carbon tax has on other countries. Sweden has had theirs since 1991. and blogs.ubc.ca explains that from 1980 to 2008, Sweden's carbon emissions decreased by over 40%. Ireland has had theirs since 2010, and from 2010 to 2018, there have been a 15% drop in their carbon emissions. After learning what a carbon tax would look like, let's talk about one of the biggest concerns in implementing one. AmericanEnergyAlliance.org explains that the tax would hurt the poor and lower income earners. It's dollar to dollar amount. No matter how much you make, you're still paying the exact same as everyone else, depending on how much carbon-based products that you purchase. But we haven't yet discussed where these tax dollars would go to. The carbon tax dollars would go directly to low-income families to help alleviate the financial burden on those who can't afford spending extra money a month on carbon tax. Although the tax dollars go directly to the people the tax affects most, don't forget the tax itself is not to aid these people. It's to fight climate change and reduce carbon emissions. To reiterate, climate change and carbon emissions are affecting the planet and the United States in harmful and tragic ways, like the Australian bushfires. These could have been prevented, and so can many more natural disasters that have not yet happened, those that are aided by climate change. Scientists like Dr. Wines are urging policymakers to take action now and to form plans. This plan should begin with a carbon tax in order to incentivize using greener methods of energy. To combat the burden this tax will have on lower income households, the carbon tax dollars will go directly to these families. Carbon taxes similar to these have been implemented in other countries with great results. It's the United States' turn to act like a global superpower and to take a stand against climate change.